Hey everyone, it's Tony D, and I remember what I was going to talk about. I was going to talk about DC Comics. Damn it. DC Comics. It does not sound good for DC Comics right now. The big news is they've fired Dan DiDio, the editor in chief, which I'm kind of not surprised. Um, I mean, he's been there a long time, and they're changing. They're going to change to a whole woke mindset over at DC, just like Marvel, which typically in the comic book world, um, I think DC has been more of a follower than a leader of trends. So it tends to follow Marvel very poorly, in my view, with a lot of trends. It's a shame because I think, I was joking on Twitter with CB that I could make DC Comics profitable. Here's what I would do. This is what I said on Twitter. First thing I would do is address the main concern. And the main problem with all paper comics right now is the price. They're too expensive. So what I would do is I would consolidate the houses into big books and make them monthly. So you'd have the House of Batman. I mean, that's what they call it behind the scenes. You wouldn't actually call the book the House of Batman, but you'd have the Batman book, which would be 5 or 6 issues, probably 6 issues, which would be Batman, Detective. I don't know what they're running right now. Dark Knight, Gotham Girls, or one of those. Harley Quinn, I guess, would be in the mix, or Gotham, whatever. And maybe for 6th one, you could just rerun a classic Batman. And you'd sell that. The price point would be, so that would be 22 pages, 6 issues be 132 pages, plus ads. So probably clock in around 150 pages, color. And I would sell that for $4.99. We would save money on the covers because it'd only be one cover. You could then further streamline the process, let the letterer do the whole book, possibly let the colorist do the whole book, and you could still have separate pencilers and inkers. You could have separate writers still. You'd want to up the writing game. That's been, in my view, the main problem creatively. You'd want the writing game to be re-upped. You'd want a very good editor as well. And you'd have some flexibility with this format because some stories could go a page short, others could go a couple pages longer. You could have a continuing story once in a while and be essentially cranking out a graphic novel in 6 chapters. Boom. You could substitute, that classic Batman story could be substitute. You could rerun an old inventory story that you just want to get rid of. You can get other comics, other stories. You could do side stories with side characters because every month you would have at least 1 or 2 Batman stories, which is what everybody tunes into, and then you could have other characters that would beef up the comic, and Harley would be one of those right now. Harley's pretty popular. And you could do a lot with that. You could do a lot with that format. It also would be cost effective. People would buy it. Instead of spending their money across 6 comics at $4 a piece, which is just insanely bad. And you treat it more like a publication with a real circulation and ads. And it would be a loss leader. You would lose money at first. Probably not a lot, because probably the orders would be very good. But you have to commit to that across the entire spectrum of the comics, right? So you'd have to commit to House of Batman, House of Justice League, House of Superman, and maybe you'd have to do at least a 4th one, because you'd want one a month, and maybe you just keep it there. And you're essentially producing the same content. You're essentially producing 5 comics a month. You streamline the process a little bit. Maybe you cut the rates back. You probably have to. probably already been cut back. I've heard rumors of that. I heard rumors of that at the show. Um, and you'd get the comic to the point where it was a little cheaper to produce, but you'd get more for your money. And that would be a good value. So 132 pages, color, for $5. I think it's a high enough price point. Comic book stores can make money. They're going to make, say, $2 on every book. And everybody will buy it because that will be the only game in town. So now, instead of having, Batman sell this much, Detective sells this much, Harley sells this much, and the rest of them don't sell very well. They all sell the same because they're all in the same book. So you essentially consolidate the fan base and hope it bumps up your sales a little bit. So you take, the fan base for Batman over at DC is probably the biggest one and the most solid. So you'd consolidate that fan base maybe to, somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 100,000, depending. And you stay away from variant covers and gimmicks like that. And you push the story. You push it. And then if you want to do this woke stuff with, other characters as Batman in the future, you could just do a one-off story like that. Why not? And if it's popular, you can go back to it again. I mean, that's what they did in the old days. You do these futuristic stories, one shot of, I remember when they did Iron Man 2040. It was Tony Stark's son, I think, in the future. And that was cool. It was a one-story thing, and then it was over. And people remember that to this day, the fans of Iron Man. So you could do stuff like that. So if you want to do Lucas Fox, the son of Lucius Fox, as Batman, you do that. And if it's popular, maybe you do it again. And if it continues to be popular, maybe he finally gets his own title. Maybe the whole woke, if the woke stuff sells, you spin it off on its own 5-issue book that you put together if it's, if the audience is there. But that's a key thing. You want to make comics towards the audience. And the problem with these people is being that they have no clue who the audience for comics are. The audience for comics are mainly men, mainly guys who like to see, guys beating people up. I mean, that's what comics are. You talk to any real comic fan, and most of these are guys. Now, that isn't to say women don't like comics. They do. A few of them do. But it's much fewer than the men. And they tend to like different comics. And if there's an audience for it, you make a women's novel, graphic novel, with 5 or 6 issues of a female characters, or whatever characters you decide appeal to women. Now, one of the highest selling girl comics over at Marvel was Barbie. They licensed Barbie and girls loved it. Very young kids liked the Sonic comic, and that was out of Archie for a while. And you could do certainly a Warner Brothers cartoon comic over at DC, and you wouldn't even have to put it out every month if it wasn't that popular. Maybe just put it out once in a while, and that would be a nice purchase for a kid, right? $5, 132 pages, and it's Bugs Bunny, Scooby-Doo, Looney Tunes, and various Hanna-Barbera cartoon things that either Warner Brothers already owns, and they're just sort of cranking it out. And because you're doing it in a bigger format, it's fine to put an old back issue in there, especially for that particular comic, because that's a new audience. The kids grind through comics, and in about 4 years, they're out of the cartoony comics and they're on to the next one. So it's perfectly fine to take an old story and revamp it. That's what Archie did for many years. They took very old Archie stories, stuff from the 50s. They'd update the dialogue, and they'd scan it in the computer, and they'd erase the record players and replace them with CD players or, iPods, or just update the technology and keep updating it, and then they'd put it out again. And every once in a while you'd see something that was very old in the background of a panel, and you'd laugh I would laugh because I knew the deal. So you could do that at DC with some of their old books, and you'd get some more use out of it. But you have to understand that the comic book as a paper entity has to go. I mean, it's going. So you have to make the transition, a serious transition to digital comics. It's not worth it for fans to buy a digital comic for $4. So, what do you do? If you go with this format, you're making them cheaper, you're keeping a price point for the store owners. They can sell a $5 comic, and that's an acceptable price point to them. Maybe you have to go $6, maybe you have to go $5.99, but I don't think so. And you essentially then sell the individual issues digitally for $1. And now that's the same price, right? They're about $1 a piece, or maybe you go $1.99, maybe you go $2. But you want to make them so cheap that people will go, oh yeah, I'll buy them. Or you have a club system where you join the DC club and you get all the comics for, $20 a month. You get everything, and you can just download them and read them. That's what people want. They sign up for a year. You get their $20 for the year, and half of them forget and don't watch, and it depends on what they want. But you have to make a commitment to story. That's why people bought these things. And stories have gone out the window. Continuity has gone out the window. The editors, in my view, they're not real editors. The editor's job wasn't to, first off, it's not to write the story. Their job is not to write the story. Their job is to go, well, this is the Batmobile Batman drove in the last issue. And he damaged it severely, so you can't use it for the current issue. You have to make reference to a repair. Or that Captain America is stuck on a faraway planet for the next year, so you can't use them for Marvel Comics or whatever. That is a comic book editor's job in the Marvel and DC universe, to keep continuity. The writer has to do that too. I mean, they have to know the basics. But the editor's job is to, guide that, and not to be a censor, to be a someone who nurtures the talent and says, what are you up to? And then talent says, well, this is the direction I'm going in. And then, hopefully the editor is supportive of that. Says, yeah, that sounds good. Okay, go in that direction. But not to deliver corporate mandates like, no. We have to have people of color in this comic, and we have to do the diversity rainbow dance, and all this other nonsense. That's not the job of the editor. The editor should be going back to corporate saying, well, I know this story is very controversial, but we have a really good writer, and the fans are loving it, and we think it's gonna get a lot of press, and it's worth your time to run it. And then that way you get better work, because you're supporting your talent, and the talent is the main thing. The artists are very important too, of course. But under this new model, you can do different things. So someone like Brian Boland, who's doing, always does fantastic art. If he does the covers of, say, the House of the JLA, you're going to get these incredible covers, and you're going to be selling a lot more books. Now, granted, they're at a discount, but if you sell enough units, and that's the whole point. If you're selling record number of units, if you're back up to 100,000, 150,000 units every single month, then you're good to go. I mean, that's where you need to be at minimum. Back in the day when comics were selling hand over fist, there were comic book companies, independent comic book companies, who announced, well, we're only going to print 100,000 copies. We don't want to print any more than that because we want the value to hold. Now we have these comics at the major houses. They barely crack 10K, 20K. I mean, no one's reading them, and there's a reason for that. They're bad. We need to recruit really solid writing talent, and that's hard to do. It's just as hard as recruiting good editing talent, and they can't be politically motivated. And what I mean by that is you have to have something to say, but you can't just, put your blinders on, because people can see those blinders. And you also have to be on the edge of what's new and trendy and cool. Um, the woke stuff has never been cool. It's only cool in the minds of people on Twitter and the media people and the exec people who think Twitter is a pulse of the nation. Same thing with Reddit. It's a very distorted view of reality. It's very curated now. You're not getting you don't have the subversiveness, right? The liberal side of politics used to be very subversive. Now it's not that way anymore. That's the status quo. So where did it go? It's as Paul Joseph Watson says, conservatism is the new punk. And that's where it is. That's why memes are so popular, and that's why the left can't meme. The conservatives are the one memeing, and you have a generation of conservative kids growing up. You need to capture their imagination because they're the future. These woke idiots, they're the past. So abandon them. They're mean and they don't buy your comics anyway. The new kids will, if you speak to them, if you know how to speak their language. So that's my pitch for fixing DC Comics. That went a lot longer than I thought. So, you can find me online. You can hire me. And if you don't want to, well, I'll wait for the word that you're bought by Marvel Comics, or start licensing the characters to IDW or whatever you guys are gonna do. It's no skin off my back. You guys never hired me anyway.